The Secret Doctrine by Elena Petrovna Blavatsky, a facsimile of the original edition of 1888, printed by the Cunningham Press, Alhambra, California. Book 2, Part 2, The Archaic Symbolism of the World Religions. Section 22. The symbolism of the mystery names IAO and YEHOVA with their relation to the cross and circle. When the Abbé Louis Constant, known as Eliphas Levi, said in his Histoire de la Magie that the Sefer Jezaira, the Zohar, and the Apocalypse of St. John are the masterpieces of the occult sciences, he ought, if he wanted to be correct and clear, have added, in Europe. It is quite true that these works contain more significance than words, and that its expression is poetical, while in numbers it is exact. Unfortunately, before anyone can appreciate the poetry of the expressions or the exactness of the numbers, he will have to learn the real significance and meaning of the terms and symbols used. And man will never learn this so long as he remains ignorant of the fundamental principle of the secret doctrine, whether in Oriental esotericism or in the Kabbalistical symbology. The key of value in all the aspects of the God names, angel names, and patriarchal names in the Bible, their mathematical or geometrical value, and their relations to manifested nature. Therefore, if, on the one hand, the Zohar astonisheth the mystic by the profundity of its views and the great simplicity of its images, on the other hand, that work misleads the students by such expressions as those used with respect to Ein Sof and Jehovah, notwithstanding the assurance that the book is careful to explain that the human form with which it clothes God is but an image of the Word, and that God should not be expressed by any thought or any form." Unquote. It is well known that Origen, Clemens, and the rabbis confessed with regard to the Kabbalah and the Bible to their being veiled and secret books, but few know that the esotericism of the Kabbalistic books in their present re-edited form is simply another and still more cunning veil thrown upon the primitive symbolism of these secret volumes. The idea of representing the hidden deity by the circumference of a circle and the creative power, male and female, or the androgynous word by the diameter across it, is one of the oldest symbols. It is upon this conception that every great cosmogony was built. With the old Aryans, the Egyptians, and the Chaldeans it was complete, as it embraced the idea of the eternal and immovable divine thought in its absoluteness, separated entirely from the incipient stage of the so-called creation, and comprised psychological and even spiritual evolution and its mechanical work, or cosmogonical construction. With the Hebrews, however, though the former conception is to be distinctly found in the Zohar and the Sefer Jezaira, or what remains of the latter, that which has been embodied subsequently in the Pentateuch proper, and especially in Genesis, is simply this secondary stage, to it, the mechanical law of creation, or rather of construction, while theogony is hardly, if at all, outlined. It is only in the first 6 chapters of Genesis, in the rejected book of Enoch, and the misunderstood and mistranslated poem of Job, that true echoes of the archaic doctrine may now be found. The key to it is lost, even among the most learned rabbis, whose predecessors in the early period of the Middle Ages have preferred, in their national exclusiveness and pride, and especially in their profound hatred of Christianity, to cast it into the deep sea of oblivion, rather than to share their knowledge with their relentless and fierce persecutors. Jehovah was their own tribal property, inseparable from, and unfit to play a part in, any other but the Mosaic law. Violently torn out of his original frame, which he fitted, and which fitted him, the Lord God of Abraham and Jacob could hardly be crammed without damage and breakage into the new Christian Canaan. Being the weakest, the Judeans could not help the desecration, but they kept the secret of the origin of their Adam Kadmon, or male-female Jehovah, and the new tabernacle proved a complete misfit for the old God. They were indeed avenged. The statement that Jehovah was the tribal god of the Jews and no higher will be denied like many other things. Yet the theologians are not in a position to tell us, in that case, the meaning of the verses 8 and 9 in Deuteronomy chapter 32. These verses say quite plainly, when the Most High, not the Lord or Jehovah either, divided to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds according to the number of the children of Israel. The Lord's, Jehovah's, portion is his people. Jacob is the lot of his inheritance. This settles the question. So impudent were the modern translators of Bibles and Scriptures, and so damaging are these verses that, following in the steps traced for them by their worthy church fathers, each translator rendered these verses in his own way. While the above-cited quotation is taken verbatim from the authorized English version, in the French Bible of the Protestant Biblical Society of Paris, according to the version revised in 1824 by J.E. Osterwald, one finds the Most High translated by souverain, a sovereign, the sons of Adam rendered by the children of men, and the Lord changed into the Eternal. For impudent sleight of hand, the French Protestant Church seems thus to have surpassed even English ecclesiasticism. Nevertheless, one thing is patent. The Lord's, Jehovah's, portion in his chosen people, and none else, for Jacob alone is the lot of his inheritance. What then have other nations who call themselves Aryans to do with this Semitic deity, the tribal god of Israel? Astronomically, the Most High is the sun, and the Lord is one of his 7 planets, whether it be Yao, the genius of the moon, or Ildabaoth Jehovah, that of Saturn, according to Origen and the Egyptian Gnostics. Note: with the Egyptian Gnostics, it was Thoth Hermes who was chief of the 7. Vide Book of the Dead. Their names are given by Origen as Adonai of the sun, Yao of the moon, Eloi Jupiter, Sabao Mars, Orai Venus, Astaphoi Mercury, and finally Ildabaoth Saturn. End of note. Let the angel Gabriel, the Lord of Iran, watch over his people, and Michael Jehovah over his Hebrews. These are not the gods of other nations, nor were they ever those of Jesus. As each Persian Dev is chained to his planet, see Origen's copy of the chart, so each Hindu Deva, a quote, Lord, unquote, has its allotted portion, a world, a planet, a nation, or a race. Plurality of worlds implies plurality of gods. We believe in the former and may recognize, but will never worship, the latter. Read Part 3 on chains of worlds and their plurality. It has been repeatedly stated in this work that every religious and philosophical symbol had 7 meanings attached to it, each pertaining to its legitimate plane of thought, that is, either purely metaphysical or astronomical, psychic or physiological, etc., etc. These 7 meanings and their applications are hard enough to learn when taken by themselves, but the interpretation and the right comprehension of them become tenfold more puzzling when, instead of being correlated or made to flow consecutively out of and to follow each other, each or any one of these meanings is accepted as the one and sole explanation of the whole symbolical idea. An instance may be given as it admirably illustrates the statement. Here are 2 interpretations given by 2 learned Kabbalists and scholars of one and the same verse in Exodus chapter 33, verses 18 to 23. Moses beseeches the Lord to show him his glory. Evidently, it is not the crude dead-letter phraseology as found in the Bible that is to be accepted. There are 7 meanings in the Kabbalah, of which we may give 2 as interpreted by the said 2 scholars. One of them quotes while explaining, "Thou canst not see my face. I will put thee in the cleft of the rock, cover thee with my hand while I pass by, and then I will take away mine hand, and thou shalt see my ahur, my back," and tells us in a gloss, that is, I will show you my back, that is, my visible universe, my lower manifestations, but as a man still in the flesh, thou canst not see my invisible nature. So proceeds the Kabbalah. Note. See the Kabbalah by Isaac Mayer. End of note. This is correct, and is the cosmo-metaphysical explanation. And now speaks the other Kabbalists, giving the numerical meaning. As it involves a good many suggestive ideas, and is far more fully given, we may allow it more space. This synopsis is from an unpublished manuscript, and explains more fully what was given in section 17, the Holy of Holies, on page 467. The numbers of the name Moses are those of I am that I am, so that the names Moses and Jehovah are at one in numerical harmony. The word Moses and the sum of the values of its letters is 345. The genius par excellence of the lunar year assumes the value 543, or the reverse of 345. In the 3rd chapter of Exodus, in the 13th and 14th verses, it is said, "And Moses said, Behold, when I come unto the children of Israel, and shall say unto them, The God of your fathers hath sent me unto you. And they shall say, What is his name? What shall I say unto them? And God said unto Moses, I am that I am." The Hebrew word for this expression are Ayeh, Asher, Ayeh, and in the value of the sums of the letters stand thus 21, 501, 21, this being his, God's, name. The sum of the values composing it are 21, 501, 21, or 543, or simply a use of the simple digit numbers in the name of Moses, but now so ordered that the name of 345 is reversed and reads 543, so that when Moses asks, "Let me see thy face, O glory," the other rightly and truly replies, "Thou canst not see my face, but thou shalt see my behind." The true sense, though not the precise words, because the corner and the behind of 543 is the face of 345. For check and to keep a strict use of a set of numbers to develop certain grand results for the object of which they are specifically employed. In other uses, adds the learned Kabbalist, of the number they saw each other face to face. It is strange that if we add 345 to 543 we have 888, which was the Gnostic Kabbalistic value of the name Christ, who was Yehoshua or Joshua, and so also the division of the 24 hours of the day gives 3 8s as quotient. The chief end of all this system of number checks was to preserve in perpetuity the exact value of the lunar year in the natural measure of days. This is the astronomical and numerical meaning in the secret theogony of sidereal cosmical gods invented by the Chaldeo-Hebrews, and 2 meanings out of 7. The other 5 would astonish the Christians still more. The series of Oedipuses who have endeavored to interpret the riddle of the Sphinx is long indeed. For many ages she has been devouring the brightest and the noblest intellects of Christendom. But now the Sphinx is conquered. In the great intellectual struggle which has ended in the complete victory of the Oedipuses of symbolism, it is not the Sphinx, however, who, burning with the shame of defeat, has had to bury herself in the sea, but verily the many-sided symbol named Jehovah, whom Christians, the civilized nations, have accepted for their God. The latter has collapsed under the too close analysis and is drowned. Symbologists have discovered with dismay that their adopted deity was only a mask for many other gods, a numerized extinct planet at best, the genius of the moon and Saturn with the Jews, or the sun and Jupiter with the early Christians, that the Trinity was in truth only an astronomical triad, unless they accepted the more abstract and metaphysical meanings given to it by the Gentiles, composed of the sun, the Father, and the two planets, Mercury the Sun, and Venus, the Holy Ghost, Sophia, the Spirit of Wisdom, Love and Truth, and Lucifer as Christ, the bright and morning star. Read Revelation, chapter 22, verse 15. Because if the Father is the Sun, the elder brother in the Eastern inner philosophy, the nearest planet to it is Mercury, Hermes, Buddha, Thoth, the name of whose mother on earth was Maia, the planet which receives 7 times more light than any other. The fact led the Gnostics to call their Christos and the Kabbalists their Hermes, in the astronomical meaning, the sevenfold light. Read at the end of this section. Finally, this god was Bel, the sun being Bel with the Gauls, Helios with the Greeks, Baal with the Phoenicians, El in Chaldean, hence Elohim, Emmanuel, El, God in Hebrew. But even the Kabbalistic God has vanished in the rabbinical workmanship, and one has now to turn to the innermost metaphysical sense of the Zohar to find in it anything like Ein Sof, that the nameless deity and the Absolute, so authoritatively and loudly claimed by the Christians. But it is certainly not to be found in the Mosaic books by those who try to read without a key to them. Ever since it was lost, Jews and Christians have tried their best to blend these two conceptions, but in vain. They have only succeeded in finally robbing even the universal deity of its majestic character and primitive meaning. This is what is said in Isis Unveiled. It would seem, therefore, but natural to make a difference between the mystery god, Yahweh, adopted from the highest antiquity by all who participated in the esoteric knowledge of the priests, and his phonetic counterparts, whom we find treated with so little reverence by the Ophites and other Gnostics. In the Ophite gems of kings, Gnostics, we find the name of Yah repeated and often confounded with that of Jehovah, while the latter simply represents one of the genii antagonistic to Abraxas. But the name Yah neither originated with nor was it the sole property of the Jews. Even if it had pleased Moses to bestow the name upon the tutelary spirit, the alleged protector and national deity of the, quote, chosen people of Israel, unquote, there is yet no possible reason why other nationalities should receive him as the highest and one living God. But we deny the assumption altogether. Besides, there is the fact that Yahweh, or Yahweh, was a mystery name from the beginning, for they never came into use before King David. Anterior to his time, few or no proper names were compounded with Ia or Yah. It looks rather as though David, being a sojourner among the Tyrians and Philistines in 2 Samuel, brought thence the name of Jehovah. He made Zadok high priest, from which came the Sadducees or Sadducees. He lived and ruled first at Hebron, Habiron, or Kabeir town, where the rites of the 4 mystery gods were celebrated. Neither David nor Solomon recognized either Moses or the law of Moses. They aspired to build a temple to Yahweh, like the structures erected by Hiram to Hercules and Venus, Adon and Astarte. Says Fürst, the very ancient name of God, Yahweh, written in the Greek Yah, appears apart from its derivation to have been an old mystic name of the supreme deity of the Shemites. Hence it was told to Moses when he was initiated at Horeb, the cave, under the direction of Jethro, the Kenite or Canaanite priest of Midian. In an old religion of the Chaldeans, whose remains are to be found among the Neoplatonists, the highest divinity enthroned above the 7 heavens, representing the spiritual light principle, and also conceived of as Demiurgus, was called Yahweh, who was like the Hebrew Yahweh, mysterious and unmentionable, and whose name was communicated to the initiated. The Phoenicians had a supreme god whose name was triliteral and secret, and he was Yao. Unquote from Isis Unveiled, Volume 2, page 298. Notes. Note on demiurges. By very few, though, for the creators of the material universe were always considered as subordinate gods to the Most High Deity. End of note. The cross, say the Kabbalists, repeating the lesson of the occultists, is one of the most ancient, nay, perhaps the most ancient of symbols. This is demonstrated at the very beginning of the proem in Volume 1. The Eastern initiates show it coeval with the circle of deific infinitude and the first differentiation of the essence, the union of spirit and matter. This was rejected, and the astronomical allegory alone was accepted and made to fit into cunningly imagined terrestrial events. Let us demonstrate this statement. In astronomy, as said, Mercury is the son of Cœlus and Lux, of the sky and light of the sun. In mythology he is the progeny of Jupiter and Maia. He is the messenger of his father Jupiter, the Messiah of the sun. In Greek his name Hermes means, among other things, the interpreter, the word by mouth, the logos or verbum. Now Mercury, besides being born on Mount Kylene among shepherds, is the patron of the latter. A psychopompic genius, he conducted the souls of the dead to Hades and brought them back, an office attributed to Jesus after his death and resurrection. The symbols of Hermes Mercury, dei termini, were placed along and at the turning points of highways as crosses are now placed in Italy, and they were cruciform. Note, Montfaucon, Antiquité, see plates in Volume 1, plate 77. The disciples of Hermes go after their death to his planet Mercury, their kingdom of heaven. End of note. Every seventh day the priests anointed these termini with oil, and once a year hung them with garlands, hence they were the anointed. Mercury, when speaking through his oracles, said, I am he whom you call the son of the Father, Jupiter and Maia. Leaving the King of Heaven, the Sun, I come to help you, mortals. Mercury heals the blind and restores sight, mental and physical. He was often represented as three-headed and called tricephalos, triplex, as one with the Sun and Venus. Finally, Mercury, as Cornutus shows, was sometimes figured under a cubic form without arms, because the power of speech and eloquence can prevail without the assistance of arms or feet. It is this cubic form which connects the termini directly with the cross, and the eloquence of the power of speech of Mercury, which made the crafty Eusebius say, Hermes is the emblem of the word, which creates and interprets all, for it is the creative word. And he shows Porphyry teaching that the speech of Hermes, now interpreted word of God, within brackets, ! In Pimander, a creative speech, verbum, in the seminal principle scattered throughout the universe. In alchemy, Mercury is the radical moist, primitive or elementary water containing the seed of the universe, fecundated by the solar fires. To express this fecundating principle, a phallus was often added to the cross, the male and female, or the vertical and the horizontal united, by the Egyptians, vide Egyptian museums. The cruciform termini also represented this dual idea, which was found in Egypt in the cubic Hermes. The author of Source of Measures tells us why, but see the last page of section 16 about the Gnostic Priapus. As shown by him, the cube unfolded becomes in display a cross of the Tau, or the Egyptian form, or again the circle attached to the Tau gives the unsated cross of the old pharaohs. They had known this from their priests and their kings initiates for ages, and also what was meant by the attachment of a man to the cross, which idea was made to coordinate with that of the origin of human life, and hence the phallic form. Only the latter came into action aeons and ages after the idea of the carpenter and artificer of the gods, Vishvarkama, crucifying a sun initiate on the cruciform lathe. As the same author writes, the attachment of a man to the cross was made use of in this very form of display by the Hindus, but made to coordinate with the idea of the new rebirth of man by spiritual, not physical, regeneration. The candidate for initiation was attached to the Tao or astronomical cross with a far grander and nobler idea than that of the origin of mere terrestrial life. On the other hand, the Semites seem to have had no other or higher purpose in life than that of procreating their species. Thus, geometrically, and according to the reading of the Bible by means of the numerical method, the author of the Hebrew-Egyptian mystery is quite correct. There, the Jewish entire system, quote, seems to have been anciently regarded as one resting in nature, and one which was adopted by nature or God as the basis of law, of the exertion, practically of creative power. That is, it was the creative design of which creation was practically the application. This seems to be established by the fact that, under the system set forth, measures of planetary times serve coordinately as measures of the size of planets and of the peculiarity of their shapes, that is, in the extension of the equatorial and polar diameters, etc., on page 3. This system seems to underlie the whole biblical structure, that of creative design, as a foundation for its ritualism and for its display of the works of the deity in the way of architecture by use of the sacred unit of measure in the Garden of Eden, the Ark of Noah, the Tabernacle, and the Temple of Solomon, unquote. Thus, on the very showing of the defenders of this system, the Jewish deity is proved to be at best only the manifested duad, never the one absolute all. Geometrically demonstrated, he is a number, symbolically a numerized priapus, and this can hardly satisfy a mankind thirsting after the demonstration of real spiritual truths and the possession of a God with a divine, not anthropomorphic nature. It is strange that the most learned of modern Kabbalists can see in the cross and circle nothing but a symbol of the manifested, creative and androgyne deity in its relation to and interference with this phenomenal world. Note, see the Zohar and the two Kabbalahs by Monsieur I. Meyer and Mathis, with interpretations, if the reader would satisfy himself of this. End of note. One author believes that man, read the Jew and Rabbi, obtaining knowledge of the practical measure by which nature was thought to adjust the planets in size to harmonize with the notions of their movements, and adds, it seems he did obtain it, and esteemed its possession as the means of his realization of the deity. That is, he approached so nearly to a conception of a being having a mind like his own, only infinitely more powerful, as to be able to realize a law of creation, established by that being, which must have existed prior to any creation, Kabbalistically called the Word. See Source of Measures, page 5. This may have satisfied the practical Semite mind, but the Eastern occultist has to decline the offer of such a God. Indeed, a deity, a being, having a mind like that of man, only infinitely more powerful, is no God that has any room beyond the cycle of creation. He has naught to do with the ideal conception of the eternal universe. He is, at best, one of the creative subordinate powers, the totality of which is called the Sephiroth, the heavenly man, and Adam Kadmon, the second logos of the Platonists. This very same idea is clearly found at the bottom of the ablest definitions of the Kabbalah and its mysteries, for example by John A. Parker, as quoted in the same work. Quote, the key of the Kabbalah is thought to be the geometrical relation of the area of the circle inscribed in the square, or of the cube to the sphere, giving rise to the relation of a diameter to circumference of a circle with a numerical value of this relation expressed in integrals. The relation of diameter to circumference being a supreme one connected with the God names of Elohim and Jehovah, which terms are expressions numerically of these relations respectively, the first being of circumference, the latter of diameter, embraces all. Two expressions of circumference to diameter in integrals are used in the Bible, one, the perfect, and the two, the imperfect. One of the relations between these is such that 2 subtracted from 1 will leave a unit of a diameter value in terms or in the denomination of the circumference value of the perfect circle, or a unit straight line having a perfect circular value, or a factor of circular value," unquote, on page 22. Such calculations can lead one no further than to unriddle the mysteries of the third stage of evolution, or the third creation of Brahma. The initiated Hindus know how to square the circle far better than any European. But of this more anon. This fact is that the Western mystics commence their speculation only at the stage when the universe falls into matter, as the occultists say. Throughout the whole series of Kabbalistic books we have not met with one sentence that would hint in the remotest way at the psychological and spiritual, as well as at the mechanical and physiological secrets of creation. Shall we then regard the evolution of the universe as simply a prototype on a gigantic scale of the act of procreation, as divine phallicism, and rhapsodize on it as the evilly inspired author of a late work of this name has done? The writer does not think so, and she feels justified in saying so, since the most careful reading of the Old Testament, esoterically as well as exoterically, seems to have carried the most enthusiastic enquirers no further than a certainty on mathematical grounds that from the first to the last chapter of the Pentateuch every scene, every character or event are shown connected directly or indirectly with the origin of birth in its crudest and most brutal form. Thus, however interesting and ingenious the rabbinical methods, the writer, in common with other Eastern occultists, must prefer those of the pagans. It is not then in the Bible that we have to search for the origin of the cross and circle, but beyond the flood. Therefore, returning to Eliphas Levi and the Zohar, we answer for the Eastern occultists and say that, applying practice to principle, they agree entirely with Pascal, who says that God is a circle, the center of which is everywhere and the circumference nowhere, whereas the Kabbalists say the reverse, and maintain it solely out of the desire to veil their doctrine. By the way, the definition of deity by the circle is not Pascal's at all, as Eliphas Levi thought. It was borrowed by the French philosopher from either Mercury Trismegistus or Cardinal Cusa's Latin work, De Docta Ignorantia, in which he makes use of it. It is, moreover, disfigured by Pascal, who replaces the words cosmic circle, which stand symbolically in the original inscription, by the word theos with the ancients. Both words were synonymous. Subsection A. Cross and circle. Something of the divine and the mysterious has ever been ascribed in the minds of the ancient philosophers to the shape of the circle. The old world, consistent in its symbolism with its pantheistic intuitions, uniting the visible and the invisible infinitudes into one, represented deity and its outward veil alike by a circle. This merging of the two into unity, and the name theos, given indifferently to both, is explained and becomes thereby still more scientific and philosophical. Plato's etymological definition of the word theos has been shown elsewhere. He derives it from the verb thein, see kratulis, to move, as suggested by the motion of the heavenly bodies, which he connects with deity. According to the esoteric philosophy, this deity is during its, quote, nights, unquote, and its, quote, days, unquote, that is, cycles of rest or activity, the eternal perpetual motion, the ever-becoming, as well as the ever-universally present and the ever-existing. The latter is the root abstraction, the former the only possible conception in human mind, if it disconnects this deity from any shape or form. It is a perpetual, never-ceasing evolution, circling back in its incessant progress through aeons of duration into its original status, absolute unity. It was only the minor gods who were made to carry the symbolical attributes of the high ones. Thus the god Shu the personification of Ra, who appears as the great cat of the basin of Persia in An. See Book of the Dead, Ritual 17, 45-47, was often represented in the Egyptian monuments seated and holding a cross, symbol of the four quarters, or the elements, attached to a circle. In that very learned work, The Natural Genesis, by Mr. Gerald Massey, on pages 408-455 in Volume 1, under the heading Typology of the Cross, there is more information to be had on the cross and circle than in any other work we know of. He who would fain have proofs of the antiquity of the cross refer to these 2 volumes. The author shows that the circle and the cross are inseparable. The crux ansata unites the circle and cross of the 4 corners. From this origin they came to be interchangeable at times. For example, the chakra or disc of Vishnu is a circle. The names denote the circling, wheeling round periodicity, the wheel of time. This the god uses as a weapon to hurl at the enemy. In like manner, Thor throws his weapon, the fieldfoot, a form of the 4-footed cross, swastika, and a type of the 4 quarters. Thus the cross is equivalent to the circle of the year. The wheel emblem unites the cross and circle in one, as does the hieroglyphic cake and the ankh. Nor was the double glyph sacred with the profane, but only with the initiates. For Raoul Rochette shows, in the same source, the sign of Venus occurring as reverse of a Phoenician coin, with a ram as the obverse. The same sign, sometimes called Venus looking-glass, because it typified reproduction, was employed to mark the hindquarters of valuable brood mares of Corinthian and other beautiful breeds of horses, which proves that so far back as those early days the cross had already become the symbol of human procreation, and that oblivion of the divine origin of cross and circle had been forgotten. Another form of the cross is given from the Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society in Volume 18, page 393, in Plate 4. Quote, at each of the 4 corners is placed a quarter arc of an oviform curve, and when the 4 put together they form an oval. Thus the figure combines the cross with the circle round in 4 parts, corresponding to the 4 corners of the cross. The 4 segments answer to the 4 feet of the swastika cross and the fieldfoot of Thor. The 4-leaved lotus flower of Buddha is likewise figured at the center of this cross, the lotus being an Egyptian and Hindu type of the 4 quarters. The 4 quarters arcs, if joined together, would form an ellipse, and the ellipse is also figured on each arm of the cross. This ellipse therefore denotes the path of the earth. Sir J. Y. Simpson copied the following specimen, the Z with a line through it, which is here presented as the cross of the 2 equinoxes and the 2 solstices placed within the figure of the earth's path. The same ovoid or boat-shaped figure appears at times in the Hindu drawings with 7 steps at each end as a form or a mode of Meru. Unquote. This is the astronomical aspect of the double glyph. There are 6 more aspects, however, and an attempt may be made to interpret a few of these. The subject is so vast that it will require in itself alone many volumes. But the most curious of these Egyptian symbols of cross and circle spoken of in the above-cited work is one which receives its full explanation and final color from Aryan symbols of the same nature. Says the author, quote, the 4-armed cross is simply the cross of the 4 quarters, but the cross sign is not always simple. Note, certainly not, for very often there are symbols made to symbolize other symbols, and these are in turn used in ideographs. End of note. This is a type that was developed from an identifiable beginning, which was adapted to the expression of various ideas afterwards. The most sacred cross of Egypt that was carried in the hands of the gods, the pharaohs, and the mummied dead is the ankh, the sign of life, the living, an oath, the covenant. The top of this is the hieroglyphic Ru, set upright on the Tau cross. The Ru is the door, gate, mouth, the place of outlet. This denotes the birthplace in the northern quarter of the heavens, from which the sun is reborn. Hence the Ru of the ankh sign is the feminine type of the birthplace representing the north. It was in the northern quarter that the goddess of the seven stars, called the Mother of the Revolutions, gave birth to time in the earliest cycle of the year. The first sign of this primordial circle and cycle made in heaven is the earliest shape of the ankh cross, a mere loop which contains both the circle and the cross in one image. This loop of news is carried in front of the oldest genitrix, Typhon of the Great Bear, as her ark, the ideograph of a period, an ending, a time, shown to mean one revolution. Quote, this then represents the circle made in the northern heaven by the Great Bear, which constituted the earliest year of time, from which we infer that the loop or Ru of the north represents that quarter, the birthplace of time, when figured as the Ru of the ankh symbol. Indeed, this can be proved. The news is an ark or rak type of reckoning. The Ru of the ankh cross was continued in the Cypriot Ro and the Coptic Ro, P. Note, the R, the Slavonian and Russian alphabets, the Kyrillice, is also the Latin P. End of note. The Rho was carried into the Greek cross, which is formed of the Rho and Chi or RK. The Rak or ankh was the sign of all beginning, Ark, on this account, and the ankh is the cross of the north, the hind part of heaven. Unquote. Now this again is entirely astronomical and phallic. The Puranic version in India gives the whole another color, and without, however, destroying the above interpretation, it is made to reveal a portion of its mysteries with the help of the astronomical key, and thus offers a more metaphysical rendering. The ankh does not belong to Egypt alone. It exists under the name of Pasa, a cord which Shiva holds in the hand of his right back arm, Shiva having 4 arms. The Mahadeva is represented in the posture of an ascetic, as Mahayogi, with his third eye, which is the Ru, set upright on the Tau cross in another form. The Pasa is held in the hand in such a way that it is the first finger and hand near the thumb which make the cross or loop in crossing. Our Orientalists would have it to represent a cord to bind refractory offenders with, because, forsooth, Kali, Shiva's consort, has the same as an attribute. The Pasa has here a double significance, as also has Shiva's Trisuli and every other divine attribute. The significance lies in Shiva, as Rudra has certainly the same meaning as the Egyptian ansated cross in its cosmic and mystic meaning. In the hand of Shiva it becomes lingaic and yonic. On that which is meant is this: Shiva, as said before, is unknown by that name in the Vedas, and it is in the white Yajurveda that he appears for the first time as a great god, Mahadeva, whose symbol is the lingam. In Rig Veda he is called Rudra, the howler, the beneficent and the maleficent deity at the same time, the healer and the destroyer. In the Vishnu Purana, he is the god who springs from the forehead of Brahma, who separates into male and female, and he is the parent of the Rudras or Maruts, half of whom are brilliant and gentle, others black and ferocious. In the Vedas, he is the divine ego aspiring to return to its pure, deific state, and at the same time that divine ego, imprisoned in earthly form, whose fierce passions make of him the roarer, the terrible. This is well shown in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, wherein the Rudras, the progeny of Rudra, god of fire, are called the 10 vital breaths, prana, life, with manas as 11th, whereas as Shiva he is the destroyer of that life. Brahma calls him Rudra and gives him besides 7 other names, which names are his 7 forms of manifestation, also the 7 powers of nature which destroy, but to recreate or regenerate. Hence the cruciform news, Pasa, in his hand, when he is represented as an ascetic. The Mahayogin has no phallic signification, and it indeed requires a strong imagination bent in this direction to find such even in an astronomical symbol. As an emblem of Do, gate, mouth, the place of outlet, it signifies the straight gate that leads to the kingdom of heaven, far more than the birthplace in a physiological sense. It is a cross in a circle and crux ansata truly, but it is a cross on which all the human passions have to be crucified before the yogi passes through the straight gate, the narrow circle that widens into an infinite one as soon as the inner man has passed the threshold. As to the mysterious constellation of the 7 rishis in the Great Bear, if Egypt made them sacred to the oldest genitrix, Typhon, India has connected all these symbols ages ago with time or yuga revolutions, and the Saptarshis are intimately connected with our present age, the dark Kali Yuga. Note, described in the Mission des Juifs by the Marquis d'Alvedre, the hierophant and leader of a large party of French Kabbalists, as the Golden Age. End of note. The great circle of time, on the face of which fancy in India has represented the tortoise, Kurma, or Sisumara, one of the avatars of Vishnu, has the cross placed on it by nature in its division and localization of stars, planets, and constellations. Thus in Bhagavata Purana 5:30 it is said that at the extremity of the tail of that animal whose head is directed toward the south and whose body is in the shape of a ring, circle, Dhruva, the ex-pole star, is placed, and along that tail are the Prajapati, Agni, Indra, Dharma, etc., and across its loins the 7 rishis. This is then the first and earliest cross and circle, into the formation of which enters the deity, symbolized by Vishnu, the eternal circle of boundless time, Kala, on whose plane lies crossways all the gods, creatures, and creations born in space and time, who, as the philosophy has it, all die at the Mahapralaya. Meanwhile, it is they, the 7 rishis, who mark the time and the duration of events in our septenary life cycle. They are the mysterious, as their supposed wives, the Pleiades, of whom only one, she who hides, has proven virtuous. The Pleiades, Kritika, are the nurses of Kartikeya, the god of war, Mars of the Western pagans, who is called the commander of the celestial armies, or rather of the Siddhas, translated yogis in heaven and holy sages on the earth, Siddha Sena, which would make Kartikeya identical with Michael, the leader of the celestial hosts, and, like himself, a virgin Kumara. Note, the more so, since he is the reptile slayer Tripurasura and the titan Taraka. Michael is the conqueror of the dragon, and Indra and Kartikeya are often made identical. End of note. Verily he is the Guha, the mysterious one, as much so are the Saptarshis and the Kritika, 7 rishis and the Pleiades, for the interpretation of all these combined reveal to the adept the greatest mysteries of occult nature. One point is worth mention in this question of cross and circle, as it bears strongly upon the elements of fire and water, which play such an important part in the circle and cross symbolics. Like Mars, who is alleged by Ovid to have been born of a mother alone, Juno, without the participation of a father, or like the avatars, like Krishna, for instance, in the West as in the East, Kartikeya is born, but in a still more miraculous manner, begotten by neither father nor mother, but out of the seed of Rudrashiva via Agni, who dropped it into the Ganges. Thus he is born from fire and water, a boy bright as the sun and beautiful as the moon. Hence he is called Agnibhuva, Agni's son, and Gangaputra, son of Ganges. Add to this fact that the Kritika, his nurses, as Matsya Purana shows, are presided over by Agni, or, in the authentic words, the 7 rishis are on a line with the brilliant Agni, and hence are called Agneya, and the connection is easy to follow. It is then the rishis who mark the time and the periods of Kali Yuga, the age of sin and sorrow. See in the Bhagavata Purana 12, verses 11, 2, 6, and 32, and Vishnu Purana. Says the latter, when the splendor of Vishnu Krishna departed for heaven, then did the Kali Yuga, during which men delight in sin, invade the world. When the 7 rishis were in Magha, the Kali Yuga, comprising 1,200 divine years, that's 432,000 years mortals, began, and when from Magha they shall reach Purvashadha, then will this Kali age attain its growth under Nanda and his successors. Note, Nanda is the first Buddhist sovereign, Chandragupta, against whom all the Brahmins were so arrayed, he of the Maurya dynasty and the grandfather of Ashoka. This is one of those passages that do not exist in the earlier Puranic manuscripts. They were added by the Vaishnavas, who interpolated almost as much out of sectarian spite as the Christian fathers did. End of note. This is the revolution of the rishis, when the 2 first stars of the 7 rishis of the Great Bear rise in the heavens, and some lunar asterism is seen at night, at an equal distance between them. Then the 7 rishis continue stationary in that conjunction for 100 years, a hater of Nanda makes Parasara say. According to Bentley, it is in order to show the quantity of the precession of the equinoxes that this notion originated among the astronomers. It was done by assuming an imaginary line or great circle passing through the poles of the ecliptic and beginning of the fixed Magha, which circle was supposed to cut some of the stars in the Great Bear. The 7 stars being called the rishis, the circle so assumed was called the line of the rishis, and being invariably fixed to the beginning of the lunar asterism Magha, the precession would be noted by stating the degree of any movable lunar mansion cut by that line or circle as an index. From Historical View of the Hindu Astronomy, page 65. There was, and still exists, a seemingly endless controversy about the chronology of the Hindus. Here is a point that could help to determine, approximately at least, the age when the symbolism of the 7 rishis and their connection with the Pleiades began. When Kartikeya was delivered to them by the gods to be nursed, the Kritika were only 6, whence Kartikeya is represented with 6 heads. But when the poetical fancy of the early Aryan symbologists made of them the consorts of the 7 rishis, they were 7. Their names are given, and these are Amba, Dula, Nitatvi, Abrayanti, Magayanti, Varshayanti, and Shupgun, and Shupunika. There are other sets of names which differ, however. Anyhow, the 7 rishis were made to marry the 7 Kritika before the disappearance of the 7th Pleiad. Otherwise, how could the Hindu astronomers speak of that which, without the help of the strongest telescopes, no one can see? This is why, perhaps, in every such case, the majority of the events described in the Hindu allegories is fixed upon as a very recent invention, certainly within the Christian era. The oldest manuscripts in Sanskrit on astronomy begin their series of nakshatras, the 27 lunar asterisms, with the sign of Kritika, and this can hardly make them earlier than 2780 before Christ. See the Vedic calendar accepted even by Orientalists. Though they get out of the difficulty by saying that the said calendar does not prove that the Hindus knew anything of astronomy at that date, and assure their readers that, calendars notwithstanding, The Indian pundits may have acquired their knowledge of the lunar mansions headed by a critica from the Phoenicians, etc. However that may be, the Pleiades are the central group of the system of sidereal symbology. They are situated in the neck of the constellation of Taurus, regarded by Madlow and others in astronomy as the central group of the system of the Milky Way, and in the Kabbalah and Eastern esotericism as the sidereal septenae, born from the first manifested side of the upper triangle, the concealed triangle. This manifested side is Taurus, the symbol of 1, the figure 1, or of the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph, bull or ox, whose synthesis is 10, or Yod, the perfect letter and number. The Pleiades, Alcyone especially, are thus considered even in astronomy as the central point around which our universe of fixed stars revolves, the focus from which and into which the divine breath, motion, works incessantly during the Manvantara. Hence, in the occult philosophy and its sidereal symbols, it is this circle and the starry cross on its face which play the most prominent part. The secret doctrine teaches us that everything in the universe, as well as the universe itself, is formed, created, during its periodical manifestations, by accelerated motion set into activity by the breath of the ever-to-be-unknown power, unknown to the present mankind at any rate, within the phenomenal world. The spirit of life and immortality was everywhere symbolized by a circle, hence the serpent biting his tail represents the circle of wisdom in infinity, as does the astronomical cross, the cross within a circle, and the globe, with 2 wings added to it, which then became the sacred scarabæus of the Egyptians, its very name being suggestive of the secret idea attached to it. For the scarabæus is called in Egypt, in the papyri, kopiron and kopri, from the verb kopron, to become, and has thus been made a symbol and an emblem of human life and of the successive becomings of man through the various peregrinations and metempsychoses, reincarnations, of the liberated soul. This mystical symbol shows plainly that the Egyptians believed in reincarnation and successive lives and existences of the immortal entity, being, however, an esoteric doctrine revealed only during the mysteries by the priest hierophants and the king's initiates to the candidates. It was kept secret. The incorporeal intelligences, the planetary spirits or creative powers, were always represented under the form of circles. In the primitive philosophy of the Hierophants, these invisible circles were the prototypic causes and builders of all the heavenly orbs, which were their visible bodies or coverings, and of which they were the souls. It was certainly a universal teaching in antiquity. See Ezekiel chapter 1. Before the mathematical numbers, says Proclus in Quinto Libro, Euclid, there are the self-moving numbers. Before the figures apparent, the vital figures, and before producing the material worlds which move in a circle, the creative power produced the invisible circles. Deus enim et circulus est, says Pherecydes in his hymn to Jupiter. It was a hermetic axiom, and Pythagoras prescribed such a singular prostration and posture during the hours of contemplation. The devotee must approach as much as possible the form of a perfect circle, prescribes the secret book. Numa tried to spread among the people the same custom. Pyrrhus tells his readers, and Pliny says, during our worship we roll up, so to say, our body in a ring, totum corpus circumagemur. Note, the goddess Basht, or Pasht, was represented with the head of a cat. This animal was sacred in Egypt for several reasons, as a symbol of the moon, the eye of Osiris, or the sun during night. The cat was also sacred to Sokhit. One of the mystic reasons was because of its body being rolled up in a circle when asleep. The posture is prescribed for occult and magnetic purposes. in order to regulate in a certain way the circulation of the vital fluid with which the cat is preeminently endowed. The 9 lives of a cat is a popular saying based on good physiological and occult reasons. Mr. Gerald Massey gives also an astronomical reason for it, which may be found in section 1, symbolism. The cat saw the sun, had it in its eye by night, was the eye of the night, when it was otherwise unseen by men. For as the moon reflects the light of the sun, so the cat was supposed to reflect it on account of its phosphorescent eyes. We might say the moon mirrored the solar light, because we have looking glasses. With them, the cat's eye was the mirror. End of note. The vision of the prophet Ezekiel reminds one forcibly of this mysticism of the circle, when he beheld a whirlwind from which came out one wheel upon the earth, whose work was as it were a wheel in the middle of a wheel. Chapter 1, verses 4 to 16. For the spirit of the living creature was in the wheels. Verse 20. Quote, Spirit whirleth about continually, and returneth again according to his circuits, says Solomon, who is made in the English translation to speak of the wind, and in the original text to refer both to the spirit and the sun. But the Zohar, the only true glossary of the Kabbalistic preacher, in explanation of this verse, which is perhaps rather hazy and difficult to comprehend, says that it seems to say that the sun moves in circuits, whereas it refers to the spirit under the sun, called the Holy Spirit, that moves circularly toward both sides, that they, it and the sun, should be united in the same essence. Unquote, from Zohar. The Brahmanical golden egg, from within which emerges Brahma, the creative deity, is the circle with the central point of Pythagoras and its fitting symbol. In the secret doctrine, the concealed unity, whether representing a Para-Brahman or the great extreme of Confucius, or the deity concealed by Ptah, the eternal light, or again the Jewish Ein Sof, is always found to be symbolized by a circle or the naught, absolute no thing and nothing, because it is infinite and the all, while the God manifested by its works is referred to as the diameter of that circle. The symbolism of the underlying idea is thus made evident. The right line passing through the center of a circle has, in the geometrical sense, length, but neither breadth or thickness. It is an imaginary and feminine symbol, crossing eternity and made to rest on the plane of existence of the phenomenal world. It is dimensional, whereas its circle is dimensionless, or to use an algebraical term, it is the dimension of an equation. Another way of symbolizing the idea is found in the Pythagorean sacred decade, which synthesizes in the dual numeral 10, the one and the circle or cipher, the absolute all manifesting itself in the word or generative power of creation. Subsection B. The fall of the cross into matter. Those who would feel inclined to argue upon the Pythagorean symbol by objecting that it is not yet ascertained so far at what period of antiquity the naught or cipher occurs for the first time, especially in India, or refer to Volume 2 of Isis Unveiled, pages 299, 300, etc. Admitting for argument's sake that the ancient world was not acquainted with our modes of calculation or Arabic figures, though we know it was, yet the circle and diameter idea is there to show that it was the first symbol in cosmogony. Before the trigrammes of Fuhi, yang, the unity, and yin, the binary, explained cunningly enough by Eliphas Levi, thus, in Dogme Rituel, Volume 1, page 124. China had her Confucius and her Taoists. The former circumscribes the great extreme within a circle with a horizontal line across. The latter placed 3 concentric circles beneath the great circle, while the Sung sages showed the great extreme in an upper circle and heaven and earth in 2 lower and smaller circles. The Yangs and the Yins are far later invention, Plato and his school never understood the deity otherwise. Many epithets of his applied to the God over all, o epipadi theos. Notwithstanding, Plato, having been initiated, could not believe in a personal God, a gigantic shadow of man. His epithets of monarch and lawgiver of the universe bear an abstract meaning well understood by every occultist who, no less than any Christian, believes in the one law that governs the universe, recognizing it at the same time as immutable. Beyond all finite existences, he says, and secondary causes, all laws, ideas, and principles, there is an intelligence or mind, nous, the first principle of all principles, the supreme idea on which all other ideas are grounded, the ultimate substance from which all things derive their being and essence, the first and efficient cause of all the order and harmony and beauty and excellency and goodness which pervades the universe, unquote, who is called, by the way of preeminence and excellence, the supreme good, the God, or theos, and the God over all. Note, see Carcass, Christianity and Greek Philosophy, 11, page 377. End of note. These words apply, as Plato himself shows, neither to the creator nor to the father of our modern monotheists, but to the ideal and abstract cause. For, as he says, this theos, the God over all, is not the truth or the intelligence, but the father of it and its primal cause. It is Plato, the greatest pupil of the archaic sages, a sage himself, for whom there was but a single object of attainment in his life, real knowledge. Who would ever have believed in a deity that curses and damns men forever on the slightest provocation? Note, the cry of despair uttered by Comte de Montpensier in his Mystère de la vie humaine, page 117, is a warrant that the cause of excellence and goodness, supposed by Plato to pervade the universe, is neither his deity nor our world. Au spectacle de tant de grandeur opposée à celui de tant de misère, l'esprit qui se met à observer ce vaste ensemble, se représente je ne sais qu'une divinité, plus grande et plus pressante encore, aurait comme brisée et mise en pièces en disparant le débris dans tout l'univers. The still greater and still more exacting divinity than the God of this world, supposed so good, is karma. And this true divinity shows well that the lesser one, our inner God, personal for the time being, has no power to arrest the mighty hand of this greater deity, the cause awakened by our actions generating smaller causes, which is called the law of retribution. End of note. Not he who considered only those to be genuine philosophers and students of truth, who possessed the knowledge of the really existing, in opposition to the mere seeming of the always existing, in opposition to the transitory, and of that which exists permanently, in opposition to that which waxes, wanes, and is developed and destroyed alternately. Note, see Isis Unveiled, Before the Veil, page 12 of volume 1, end of note. Speusippus and Xenocrates followed in his footsteps. The one, the original, had no existence in the sense applied to it by mortal men. The Timion, honored one, dwells in the center as in the circumference, but it is only the reflection of the deity, the world soul, the plane of the surface of the circle. See Plato Parmenides, 141e. The cross and circle are a universal conception, as old as human mind itself. They stand foremost on the list of a long series of, so to say, international symbols, which expressed very often great scientific truths, besides their direct bearing upon psychological and even physiological mysteries. And this symbol is precisely one of this kind, and is based upon the oldest esoteric cosmogony. It is no explanation to say, as Eliphas Levi does, that God, the universal love, having caused the male unit to dig an abyss in the female binary, or chaos, produced thereby the world. Besides being as gross a conception as any, it does not remove the difficulty of conceiving it without losing one's veneration for the rather too human-like ways of the deity. It is to avoid such anthropomorphic conceptions that the initiates never use the epithet God to designate the one and the second less principle in the universe, and that, faithful in this to the oldest traditions of the secret doctrine the world over, they deny that such imperfect and often not very clean work could ever be produced by absolute perfection. There is no need to mention here other still greater metaphysical difficulties. Between speculative atheism and idiotic anthropomorphism there must be a philosophical mean and a reconciliation. The presence of the unseen principle throughout all nature, and the highest manifestation of it on earth, man, can alone help to solve the problem, which is that of the mathematician, whose X must ever elude the grasp of our terrestrial algebra. The Hindus have tried to solve it by their avatars. The Christians think they did it by their one divine incarnation. Exoterically, both are wrong. Esoterically, both of them are very near the truth. Alone among the apostles of the Western religion, Paul seems to have fathomed, if not actually revealed, the archaic mystery of the cross. As for the rest of those who, by unifying and individualizing the universal presence, have thus synthesized it into one symbol, the central point in the crucifix, they have shown thereby that they have never seized the true spirit of the teaching of Christ, and by their interpretations they have degraded it in more than one way. They have forgotten the spirit of that universal symbol, and have selfishly monopolized it, as though the boundless and the infinite can ever be limited and conditioned to one manifestation individualized in one man, or even in a nation. The four arms of the X, the decussated cross, the decusated cross, and the hermetic, pointing to the four cardinal points, were all understood by the mystical minds of the Hindus, Brahmins, and Buddhists thousands of years before it was heard of in Europe, and that symbol was and is found all over the world. They bent the ends of that cross and made of it their swastika, now the one of the Buddhist Mongolian. Note, the swastika is certainly one of the oldest symbols of the ancient races. In our century, says R. H. Mackenzie of Royal Masonic Cyclopedia, it, the swastika, has survived in the form of the mallet in the Masonic fraternity. Among the many meanings the author gives of it, we do not find, however, the most important one, Masons evidently not knowing it. End of note. It implies that the central point is not limited to one individual, however perfect, that the principle, God, is in humanity, and humanity, as all the rest, is in it, like drops of water are in the ocean, the four ends being toward the four cardinal points, hence losing themselves in infinity. Isarim, an initiate, is said to have found at Hebron, on the dead body of Hermes, the well-known smaragdine tablet which, it is said, contained the essence of hermetic wisdom, separate the earth from the fire, the subtile from the gross, ascend from the earth to heaven, and then descend again to earth, was traced on it. The riddle of the cross is contained in these words, and its double mystery is solved to the occultist. Quote from Isis Unveiled, the philosophical cross, the two lines running in opposite directions, and the perpendicular, the height and breadth, which the geometrizing deity divides at the intersecting point, and which forms the magical as well as the scientific quaternary, when it is inscribed within the perfect square, is the basis of the occultist. Within its mystical precinct lies the master key which opens the door of every science, physical as well as spiritual. It symbolizes our human existence, for the circle of life circumscribes the 4 points of the cross, which represent in succession birth, life, death, and immortality. Attach thyself, say the alchemists, to the 4 letters of the tetragram disposed in the following manner. The letters of the ineffable name are there, although thou mayst not discern them at first. The incommunicable axiom is cabalistically contained therein, and this is what is called the magic arcanum by the masters. Unquote from Isis Unveiled. Again, the T, Tau, and the astronomical cross of Egypt are conspicuous in several apertures in the remains of Palenque. In one of the bas-relievos of the palace of Palenque on the west side, sculptured as a hieroglyphic rite under the seated figure, is a Tau. The standing figure, which leans over the first one, is in the act of covering its head with the left hand with the veil of initiation, while it extends its right with the index and middle finger pointing to heaven. The position is precisely that of a Christian bishop giving his blessing, or the one in which Jesus is often represented while at the Last Supper. The Egyptian hierophant had a square headdress which he had to wear always during his functions. The perfect tau, formed of the perpendicular descending male ray and horizontal line, matter, female principle, and the mundane circle, was an attribute of Isis, and it is but at death that the Egyptian cross was laid on the breast of the mummy. These square hats are worn unto this day by the Armenian priests. The claim that the cross is purely a Christian symbol introduced after our era is strange indeed, when we find Ezekiel stamping the foreheads of the men of Judah who feared the Lord, Ezekiel chapter 9 verse 4, with the signum tau, and it is translated in the Vulgate. In the ancient Hebrew this sign was formed thus, lying cross, but in the original Egyptian hieroglyphics as a perfect Christian cross, tat, the emblem of stability. In the Revelation also, the Alpha and Omega, spirit and matter, the first and the last, stamps the name of his Father in the foreheads of the elect, on page 323, volume 2. Moses, in Exodus chapter 12, verse 22, orders his people to mark their doorposts and lintels with blood, lest the Lord God should make a mistake and smite some of his chosen people instead of the doomed Egyptians. And this mark is a tau, the identical Egyptian-handled cross, with the half of which talisman Horus raised the dead, as is shown on a sculptured ruin at Philae. Enough was said in the text about the swastika and the tau. Verily may the cross be traced back into the very depths of the unfathomable archaic ages. Its mystery deepens rather than clears, as we find it on the statues of Easter Island, in Old Egypt, in Central Asia, engraved on rocks as tau and swastika, in pre-Christian Scandinavia, everywhere. The author of the Hebrew-Egyptian mystery stands perplexed before the endless shadow it throws back into antiquity, and is unable to trace it to any particular nation or man. He shows the Targums handed down by the Hebrews, obscured by translation. In Joshua 8, verse 29, read in Arabic, and in the Targum of Jonathan, it is said, "The king of Ai he crucified upon a tree." The Septuagint rendering of a suspension from a double word, Wordsworth on Joshua. The strangest expression of this kind is in Numbers 25 verse 4, where, by onkelos, within brackets question mark, it is read, "Crucify them before the Lord Jehovah against the sun." The word here, to nail to, is rendered properly, foist, by the Vulgate, to crucify. The very construction of this sentence is mystic, unquote. So it is, but the spirit of it has been ever misunderstood. To crucify before, not against, the sun is a phrase used of initiation. It comes from Egypt and primarily from India. The enigma can be unriddled only by searching for its key in the mysteries of initiation. The initiated adept, who had successfully passed through all the trials, was attached, not nailed, but simply tied on a couch in the form of a tau, in Egypt, of a swastika without the 4 additional prolongations. Thus a cross, not a swastika, plunged in a deep sleep, the sleep of Siloam, it is called to this day among the initiates in Asia Minor, in Syria, and even Higher Egypt. He was allowed to remain in this state for 3 days and 3 nights, during which time his spiritual ego was said to confabulate with the gods, descend into Hades, Amenti, or Patala, according to the country, and do works of charity to the invisible beings, whether souls of men or elemental spirits, his body remaining all the time in a temple crypt of subterranean cave. In Egypt, it was placed in the sarcophagus in the king's chamber in the Pyramid of Cheops, and carried during the night of the approaching third day to the entrance of a gallery, where at a certain hour the beams of the rising sun struck full on the face of the entranced candidate, who awoke to be initiated by Osiris, and taught the god of wisdom. Let the reader who doubts the statement consult the Hebrew originals before he denies. Let him turn to some most suggestive Egyptian bas-relief. One especially from the temple of Philae represents a scene of initiation. Two gods' hierophants, one with the head of a hawk, the sun, the other ibis-headed. Mercury taught the god of wisdom and secret learning, the assessor of Osiris' son, are standing over the body of a candidate just initiated. They are in the act of pouring on his head a double stream of water, the water of life and new birth, which stream is interlaced in the shape of a cross and full of small ansated crosses. This is allegorical of the awakening of the candidate, now an initiate, when the beams of the morning sun, Osiris, strike the crown of his head, his entranced body being placed on its wooden tower so as to receive the rays. Then appeared the hierophants, initiators, and the sacramental words were pronounced, ostensibly to the sun Osiris, addressed in reality to the spirit sun within, enlightening the newly born man. Let the reader meditate on the connection of the sun with the cross in both its generative and spiritually regenerative capacities from the highest antiquity. Let him examine the tomb of Beoxli in the reign of Ramses II, where he will find the crosses in every shape and position. So again, on the throne of that sovereign, and finally a fragment from the hall of the ancestors of Thutmose III, preserved in the National Library of Paris, which represents the adoration of Baccan Aliare. In this extraordinary sculpture and painting one sees the disk of the sun beaming upon an ansated cross placed upon a cross of which those of the Calvary were perfect copies. The ancient manuscripts mention these as the hard couches of those who were in spiritual travail, the act of giving birth to themselves. A quantity of such cruciform couches, on which the candidate, thrown into a dead trance at the end of his supreme initiation, was placed and secured, were found in the underground halls of the Egyptian temples after their destruction. The worthy and holy fathers of the Cyril and Theophilus types used them freely, believing they had been brought and concealed there by some new converts. Alone Origen, and after him Clemens Alexandrinus and other ex-initiates knew better, but they preferred to keep silent. Again, let the reader read the Hindu fables, as the Orientalists call them, and remember the allegory of Vishvakarma, the creative power, the great architect of the world, called in the Veda the all-seeing God who sacrifices himself to himself. The spiritual egos of mortals are his own essence, one with him, therefore. Remember that he is called Deva Vardika, the builder of the gods, and that it is he who ties the sun Surya, his son-in-law, on his lathe in the exoteric allegory. On the swastika, in esoteric tradition, as on earth, he is the hierophant initiator, and cuts away a portion of his brightness. Vishvakarma, remember again, is the son of Yoga Siddha, that is, the holy power of yoga, and the fabricator of the fiery weapon, the magic Agniyastra. The narrative is given more fully elsewhere. The author of the Kabbalistic work so often quoted from asks, "The theoretical use of crucifixion must have been somehow connected with personification of this symbol, the structure of the Garden of Paradise symbolized by a crucified man. But how, and as showing what? The symbol was of the origin of measures, shadowing forth creative law or design. What, practically, as regards humanity, could actual crucifixion betoken? Yet that it was held as the effigy of some mysterious working of the same system is shown from the very fact of the use. there seems to be deep below, deep as to the mysterious workings of these number values, the symbolization of the connection of 113 to 355 with 2612 to 6561 why crucified man. Not only are they shown to work in the cosmos, but by sympathy they seem to work out conditions relating to an unseen and spiritual world, and the prophets seem to have held knowledge of the connecting link. Reflection becomes more involved when it is considered that the power of expression of the law exactly by numbers, clearly defining a system, was not the accident of the language, but was its very essence, and of its primary organic construction. Therefore, neither the language nor the mathematical system attaching to it could be of man's invention unless both were founded upon a prior language, which afterwards became obsolete." Unquote from page 205. The author proves these points by further elucidation and reveals the secret meaning of more than one dead letter narrative by showing that probably man was the primordial word, the very first word possessed by the Hebrews, whoever they were, to carry the idea by sound of a man. The essential of this word was 113, the numerical value of that word, from the beginning, and carried with it the elements of the cosmical systems displayed. This is demonstrated by the Hindu Vitubha, a form of Vishnu, as already said. The figure of Vitubha, even to the nail marks on the feet, is that of Jesus crucified in all its details save the cross, and that man was meant is proved to us further by the fact of the initiate being reborn after his crucifixion on the tree of life. Note, see More's Hindu pantheon, where Vitubha's left foot bears the mark of the nail on the figure of his idol. End of note. This, quote, tree, unquote, has now become exoterically, through its use by the Romans as an instrument of torture and the ignorance of the early Christian schemers, the tree of death. Thus, one of the 7 esoteric meanings implied in this mystery of crucifixion by the mystic inventors of the system, the original elaboration and adoption of which dates back to the very establishment of the mysteries, is discovered in the geometrical symbols containing the history of the evolution of man. The Hebrews, whose prophet Moses was so learned in the esoteric wisdom of Egypt, and who adopted their numerical system from the Phoenicians, and later from the Gentiles, from whom they borrowed most of their Kabbalistic mysticism, adapt most ingeniously the cosmic and anthropological symbols of the heathen nations to their peculiar secret records. If Christian sacerdotalism has lost the key of it today, the early compilers of the Christian mysteries were well versed in esoteric philosophy and the Hebrew occult metrology, and used it dexterously. Thus they took the word Aish, one of the Hebrew word forms for man, and used it in conjunction with that of Shana, lunar year, so mystically connected with the name of Jehovah, the supposed father of Jesus, and embosomed the mystic idea in an astronomical value and formula. The original idea of man crucified in space belongs certainly to the ancient Hindus, and Muir shows it in his Hindu pantheon in the engraving that represents Vitubha. Plato adopted it in his decusated cross in space, the X, the second god who impressed himself on the universe in the form of a cross. Krishna is likewise shown crucified. See Dr. Lundy's Monumental Christianity, figure 72. Again it is repeated in the Old Testament in the queer injunction to crucify men before the Lord, the Son, which is no prophecy at all, but has a direct phallic significance. In section 2 of that same most suggestive work on the Kabbalistic meanings, the Hebrew-Egyptian mystery, we read again, quote, "In symbol, the nails of the cross have for the shape of the heads thereof a solid pyramid, and a tapering square obeliskal shaft, or phallic emblem, for the nail. Taking the position of the 3 nails in the man's extremities and on the cross, they form almost a triangle in shape, one nail being at each corner of the triangle." The wounds or stigmata in the extremities are necessarily for the sanity of the square. The 3 nails with the 3 wounds are in number 6, which denotes the 6 faces of the cube unfolded, which make the cross or man form, or 7, counting 3 horizontal and 4 vertical bars on which the man is placed. And this in turn points to the circular measure transferred on to the edges of the cube. The 1 wound of the feet separates into 2 when the feet are separated, making 3 together for all, and 4 when separated, or 7 in all. Another most holy, and with the Jews, feminine base number." Unquote. Thus, while the phallic or sexual meaning of the crucifixion nails is proven by the geometrical and numerical reading, its mystical meaning is indicated by the short remarks upon it, as given above, in its connection with and bearing upon Prometheus. Here is another victim, for he is crucified on the cross of love, on the rock of human passions, a sacrifice to his devotion to the cause of the spiritual element in humanity. Now the primordial system, the double glyph that underlies the idea of the cross, is not of human invention, for cosmic ideation and the spiritual representation of the divine ego-man are at its basis. Later it expanded in the beautiful idea adopted by and represented in the mysteries, that of a regenerated man, the mortal, who, by crucifying the man of flesh and his passions on the Procrustean bed of torture, became reborn as an immortal. Leaving the body, the animal man, behind him, tied on the cross of initiation like an empty chrysalis, the ego soul became as free as a butterfly. Still later, owing to the gradual loss of spirituality, the cross became in cosmology and anthropology no higher than a phallic symbol. With the esotericists, from the remotest times, the universal soul, or anima mundi, the material reflection of the immortal ideal, was the source of life of all beings and of the life principle of the 3 kingdoms, and it was septenary with the Hermetic philosophers as with all ancients. For it is represented as a 7-fold cross, whose branches are respectively light, heat, electricity, terrestrial magnetism, astral radiation, motion, and intelligence, or what some call self-consciousness. We have said it elsewhere, long before the cross or its sign were adopted as symbols of Christianity, the sign of the cross was used as a sign of recognition among adepts and neophytes, the latter being called crests, from Christos, a man of tribulation and sorrow. Says Eliphas Levi, the sign of the cross adopted by the Christians does not belong exclusively to them. It is Kabbalistic and represents the opposition and quaternary equilibrium of the elements. We see by the occult verse of the Pater Noster that there were originally 2 ways of making it, or at least 2 very different formulas to express its meaning, one reserved for priests, initiates, the other given to neophytes and the profane. Thus, for example, the initiate, carrying his hand to his forehead, said, "To thee," and then he added, "belong," and continued, while carrying his hand to the breast, "the kingdom." Then to the left shoulder, justice, to the right shoulder, and mercy. Then he joined the 2 hands, adding, throughout the generating cycles, "Tibi sunt malkut, et gebura, et cassid per aeonas," a sign of the cross absolutely and magnificently Kabbalistic, which the profanations of Gnosticism made the militant and official church completely lose. Unquote from Dogma et Ritual, etc., Volume 2, page 88. The militant and official church did more. Having helped herself to what had never belonged to her, she took only that which the profane had, the Kabbalistic meaning of the male and female Sephiroth. She never lost the inner and high meaning, since she never had it, Eliphas Levi's pandering to Rome notwithstanding. The sign of the cross adopted by the Latin Church was phallic from the beginning, while that of the Greeks was the cross of the neophytes, the Christ. Next section is 23. The Upanishads in Gnostic literature.